There we go. My housekeeping's out of the way. We are ready for today's discussion. That's going to give you important insights on the legal strategies that can help protect your business. So one important point I want to make right here at the top is we have an incredible panel today to guide us through our discussion, but please do remember that this information does not constitute legal advice. These are best practices and general information to serve your business. So let's get started. We have two incredible experts. I'm going to introduce them, then we'll pepper them with many questions and learn from their expertise. So first, I'll introduce KRISTEN HERWITZ. KRISTEN is a business attorney who's committed to helping BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and women entrepreneurs protect their work and themselves as their businesses and their impacts grow. She built her law practice, HERWITZ Law, on paying it forward 8 years ago, reinvesting at least 10% of her profits into organizations that support women and social justice. And she now offers a DIY contract template shop, in addition to her flat rate and transparent pricing for strategic legal advisory services. KRISTEN is also a coach on AOF's free coaching hub, and she posts legal tips on her Instagram as well. So you can get connected in many different ways to KRISTEN. Thank you so much for being with us, KRISTEN.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And next we have Kim MECKWOOD. Kim is the owner and inventor of Click and Carry, a unique bag handle carrying apparatus. She hails from a background of medical device and pharmaceutical sales and decided to make a major life change after the life-altering experience of being diagnosed with breast cancer. That journey through cancer gave her the faith and determination to quit her stable job and bring her really unique and very useful product to market. Kim was originally inspired to invent the Click and Carry after a breakup with a boyfriend made her realize that she no longer had help bringing in the groceries. And since then, she has been featured on Shark Tank, Good Morning America, and QVC, just to name a few. Thank you so much for being here, Kim.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. All right, so let's jump in. Our first question, just getting started. KRISTEN, can you outline the key legal considerations that a business owner just starting out in a business should consider, please?
Yes. So I think when most people are just getting started in business, like we don't go into business to do our own legal or accounting. Like I don't even do that. And it can seem like there's so many things to think about that it's incredibly overwhelming. So a lot of times when clients I've worked with have started at a traditional law firm, they get kind of a fire hose of information that is not particularly helpful. So I think that starting with a few key things is a nice way to break it down and help us actually take action on things and take that action in a more informed way so that we can start our business with an intention to grow in the direction that makes sense for us and feels values aligned, but is also going to support the business strategy and kind of longer term view that we have for our particular business. So one of those considerations to think about upfront is business structure. And that doesn't mean that you need to form an LLC from the get-go. There are situations where that is appropriate, and there are many others where that's not really necessary and you need to kind of test some things out first. So when you hear about folks forming an LLC or limited liability company, that's what that stands for, or a corporation, or a lot of people hear S Corp, and that's a tax election status. It's not an actual business entity. You want to really think about what's going to make sense for you and hopefully talk to both a lawyer and an accountant who's familiar with your financial situation, because those decisions don't just impact you from the get-go in terms of legal risk, but also can impact the strategic financial choices that you can or cannot make and do or don't have access to then and down the line. So I always recommend meeting with both a lawyer and a CPA, even just for like an initial consult to get a little more information before deciding when and whether to form some sort of formal business. Another thing, and we will talk a little bit more about that later, but just to keep it high level here, another thing that every business needs to think about from the get-go is contracts. And that is, what is going to be the exchange of content or money or something of value that you're providing or you're receiving. So when we think about relationships that we have different networks of in our business, that might be someone who is designing your website or just designing a logo for you. It could be, that first contract that you need to get together so that you actually can work with a client and set expectations for them while also protecting yourself and understanding like what you're going to be getting paid and when, and communicating that clearly with the client, which helps everybody be on the same page from the outset as much as possible to hopefully prevent any sort of accidental misunderstandings down the road. Having said that, a lot of people go into business and don't have contracts in place. And, you learn it's a lot of trial by fire with small business owners, especially when we have limited budgets and bandwidth and we're kind of going in a bunch of different directions, but at least getting some basics down on paper about what you provide and, what the exchange of value is going to be is, minimal starting point. We'll talk about some more of that later. And then another key consideration is intellectual property. So without getting too deep into the weeds on that, that can be anything from, content that you are creating. So that could be written content, that can be some sort of visual materials, that can be, a patent because you're actually creating some or inventing something, which Kimberly can certainly speak to later. That can also be trademarks for brand names and logos. And then there's a whole host of intellectual property that you can't and don't want to register that falls under trade secret. So I'll go into that a little bit more later on, but there are reasons that we choose to register things sometimes and then choose to keep other things kind of tightly protected with different internal policies, as well as non-disclosure agreements and other tools that we can use in our business to help us feel safe sharing enough of our information and enough of our products and intellectual property, but also protecting ourselves, from bad actors, which most people aren't, but, there are definitely some corporations and stuff you want to be more careful with versus individuals. So.
Thank you so much, KRISTEN. The high level overview of the entity piece, contracts piece, and then the intellectual property. We're going to dive into each of those kind of like three important pillars. So thank you. All right. So before we get into each structure specifically on that high level, Kim, I would love to hear from you. How did you approach the legal aspects of getting started in your business? What lessons did you learn when you were starting Click and Carry about those legal aspects?
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, I didn't know KRISTEN back in the day, but I'm proud to say I did it correctly. But I actually started with my patent. I applied for a utility patent, and then subsequently I applied for a second, and then I also applied for a trademark. And during that time, I also used NDAs. So I did consult with an attorney for NDAs. All of that was done prior to me incorporating. So I met with an incorporation attorney, and he gave me some great advice. And I also gave that advice to my CPA to see what he thought of this. And as a result, we chose together to begin an S corporation based on taxes and what I envisioned for my company in the future. So that's how I went about working with the legal system. So for me, I did it backwards. I started with the patents, the trademarks, and the NDAs.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's backwards. I love that example, Kim, because it demonstrates that there's not necessarily a linear path with some of these things. There's certain things it makes sense to do first in certain situations, or even in most situations, but you can get where you need to go in a lot of different ways. And it's great to hear that you sought help from other experts, because you don't have to do it all by yourself, right?
Absolutely. In fact, KRISTEN said it. It's basically trial by fire, and working through the two utility patents and the trademark was actually an abandoned trademark. So you learn things. And because of that, I knew I had to protect myself. And that's how I had the mindset to know to not only deal with my accountant, but also with the incorporation attorney. So it was very helpful. It is trial by fire. So be patient with yourself, friends out there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. All right. So diving into each of these important pillars of legal considerations, KRISTEN, I'll come back to you when we talk about business structure, kind of entity structure. Different structures can have, like the structure you choose can have a big impact on your liability, your taxes, all of these things that you were mentioning before. So what factors should a business owner consider when choosing the right legal structure for their business?
So there are a few different things to think about. And from the legal side of things, I like to kind of break it down in terms of like, what is the actual or relative risk here? So as an example, someone who's kind of going into business to provide, some coaching to someone, maybe some executive coaching is a pretty common thing. And there are certainly things about it that carry some risk, but it's not one of those things where, someone is going to potentially die from the service or, that you're providing. And so with those folks, sometimes, you don't necessarily need to start right away with forming an LLC or a corporation. It's something that, like you might want to try it and see, like, do I actually want to stay in business for myself? Do I end up, kind of getting absorbed by someone else before you go through the cost and expense of forming some sort of business entity? When someone is opening a physical space where other people are going to be accessing that. So that could be a storefront, that could be welcoming folks into your home office for meetings. Certainly a fitness studio, it's a physical space and people are moving their bodies, possibly getting adjusted. You can see like the relative levels of risk go up and up with that. Same for products. Is this something that someone is going to be putting in their body or on their body? That is going to be higher risk than a hair claw or some sort of product like that, which again, it's not that somebody's toddler couldn't swallow it or stab themselves with it, but the risk is a little less than something that people are putting on their skin or inside their bodies. Other things to think about is if you're towing the line with some sort of professional licensed service. So that would be, I'm talking to like life coaches out there, could be some of the executive coaches that I talked about. It's certainly anyone in kind of the health and wellness space where maybe you're kind of towing the line with medical advice a little bit, or, you're providing some sort of kind of mental health support, but you're not a mental health professional. And so this is where we want to get really clear on, again, like what are the relative risks involved from the legal side of things. And then you talk to the CPA who can assess what your financial situation is. Do you already have clients? Do you have multiple sources of income? A lot of small business owners start their businesses when they are still full-time or part-time employed. And so what is that runway going to look like? Are you trying to keep that full-time or part-time employment and also run your business? Or are you eventually trying to hop over and do your business full time? Because what makes sense at the outset can change over time as your business grows. Or on the flip side, I have had a client who stepped away from their business a bit. They're still keeping it running, but they took a full-time position that they weren't expecting to have the opportunity to take. And so, but in 5 years, they want to step back to it. So then we talk about, okay, how do we ramp it down a little bit? In terms of another consideration we often don't talk about, so it's not just the legal risk, it's not just the financial strategy around taxes and what's going to make sense for your CPA. It's also like, who are you as a person and how do you tolerate personal risk? Do you have assets like a home, a car, a savings account? Are you someone who just kind of flies by night and you're totally comfy with that? And you're like, I'm just going to try this out a little bit and see how it goes. Or are you someone where you feel like you need a little more security and certainty? And for a lot of my clients that I work with in my private practice, they tend to have multiple overlapping marginalized identities. So they are already navigating a world that doesn't feel safe for them because it's a Black queer woman, for example, who's got a lot of different things already stacked against her. And so for that situation, what is going to make sense is probably to set up a much safer, more firm container from the start. So she doesn't have to worry if something goes wrong in her business and can just focus on what she actually loves doing and what she wants to put out in the world. And then, so that's like do I form a business entity so that I take some of my personal risk off the table, or so I reduce my taxes? And then it's what kind of business entity. So just by doing business, you formed a sole proprietor. You didn't do anything except sell a thing. You're already in business. You need a business license from your local county or city. If you want to formalize something either for the legal risks or for the tax strategy, then you can form, often small business owners will form a limited liability company. It's a easier, cheaper to form container for the risk in your business. You also have access to changing the tax classification. So if your business grows and you're making more than 50 or 80 or $100,000 a year, again, check in with your CPA, because it might be time to shift from being taxed as a sole proprietorship. Again, you formed the LLC, but you're automatically taxed as a sole proprietorship. So you still get that lovely self-employment tax. It might be time to shift to an S Corp and start paying yourself, a salary, which doesn't have to be a fixed thing. It can be based on your monthly net revenue. But that's something to think about. If you are looking to get outside investor funding, set up a really kind of more complex structure, then a corporation may be something that is more appropriate for you. There are certainly preferences in the venture capital world and elsewhere for certain types of structures, and forming that in Delaware as an example. And so for that type of scenario where you're looking for outside funding from certain types of investor sources, you are going to want to do that in the way that that industry kind of expects it to go, and work with a law firm that supports, startups that are looking for outside capital. Versus for me, I work with a lot of business owners who are getting going, moving slow but steady, and want to continue to stay involved in the day-to-day management. They're not going to hire, hundreds of employees. They might get to, 50. And so again, very different scenarios. There's not a one size fits all cookie cutter approach to choosing the business entity.
Definitely not cookie cutter, but thank you so much for highlighting a lot of the important kinds of things to think about when making that choice of whether to incorporate and then what kind. So Kim, for your situation, I know you mentioned that you and your team ended up selecting the S Corp business structure. Can you share a little bit about why you chose that particular structure and how it's impacted your operations?
Sure. This is actually a very short answer. As KRISTEN mentioned earlier, I actually worked simultaneously with starting my business. It was just a side gig. But I did eventually want it to be my full-time position. So that's why I decided to go and become an S corporation, because I did want to pay myself a salary. And it has been actually 3 years that I've been doing Click and Carry full-time ever since my episode aired on Shark Tank. So that was my reasoning behind selecting an S corporation.
It makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it's just a really practical and easy determination.
Yep. And I wasn't there at the time, but that was my reasoning behind it. And Paul, my accountant, knew that that was my goal. So it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, great. All right. So we have many questions in the chat coming in about all sorts of different legal considerations. So just want to pause and let everybody on the line know that we are seeing your questions and our team is taking them down. So we have time for questions at the end, so please do keep those coming. And we will also be sharing a recording of this conversation with you all via email, so that you can go back and review any of this information, just so you don't feel like you have to furiously be taking notes about all of this brilliance that our panelists are sharing with us. All right, so we will move to kind of that second pillar when we think about a solid legal foundation for a business, which is the contracts. So KRISTEN, what would you say are the essential elements of a solid contract? I know you have a contract template service that you offer. What are some of those essential elements? And then the reverse, what are some common mistakes that entrepreneurs should avoid?
So this is a great question, because again, when folks are getting started, you can't necessarily afford to hire a lawyer to write a custom contract. You also don't even really necessarily know what you need in it or how you're going to run your business. And there's going to be some stuff that you change along the way. So even if you had the money, it doesn't always make sense to put your budget there. But it is important to have a contract in place. Again, I think if we think about the purpose of a contract. It's about kind of setting their relationship up for success from the start. And also anticipating where things may go wrong. And so what kind of communication do we need to have to protect ourselves, feel like we were on the up and up with communicating clearly, and so that our clients are also clear before they purchase something from us or before they start working with us. And so I like to start with like anticipating like the breakup clause. Like, what happens if this doesn't work out? We all go in with the best intentions and we're so excited. And you know, sometimes people are partnering with a friend and you know, they're just really amped and feeding off of that positive energy. And to protect, you know, any pre-existing friendship or, you know, professional relationships you may have, and to protect your business, and also, you know, your client's interests too. Thinking about, okay, if this just really isn't working, what might the reasons for that be? And when do we want to be able to part ways? And so that might be, you know, anticipating just starting out with, you know, a 3-month term. So that meaning the length of time you're kind of testing the waters, and then revisiting a renewal clause. If someone just breaks a promise, and like, you know, one thing would be misleading or straight up lying about something where it would take significant amounts of repair and energy to kind of fix that situation, if it can even be fixed. You might want to have the ability to just straight up fire your client. And then on the flip side, you know, if the client is like, this just isn't really working for me, what rights do you want to give them about when and how to end that, and how much notice? Or are you both just fully locked in? So for different scenarios, different things can make sense. Again, I will go back to an example of a different Black woman client of mine who has a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm who's, you know, working on organizational change. And so a lot of times they step into these corporations who are like, yeah, we're ready to do the work. We really, you know, want to dismantle white supremacy. And then they start doing the work and they're like, oh, this is hard and uncomfortable. And now I feel angry. Like, how do and I don't think this isn't what we thought it was going to be. We thought it was going to be, you know, like a touchy-feely, happy, we're going to all be best friends kind of thing. How do we do that better? And you've got to dismantle some stuff before you can get to that point. So for that type of situation, you know, her being able to get out of that contract, you know, pretty quickly, if there's, you know, a few different discussions around, you know, we need to have respectful communication at a minimum, you know, makes sense versus, you know, if you're talking about technology or software agreements, you know, licenses that last for a year, you know, we sign up for a certain platform to host webinars on. And that's a good example of like, you know, you sign up on a month-by-month basis, or you get a discount when you sign up for the year. And so what that term and how you can end it is going to be different. Another thing to think about that kind of goes hand in hand with that is payment, making sure that you collect enough money upfront, if not fully upfront, which, you know, we're used to paying fully upfront for products. People are not as used to that for services. And what is often happening is that, especially when folks work with a bigger organization and, you know, things don't go well, or, you know, it could just be due to like corporate budget issues, and they're trying to cut some people loose. And if they can just do that at any time and you didn't collect money up front, and they're now saying, well, we didn't really like what you did, or you didn't really finish it, so we're not going to pay you. I've had multiple folks come to me after getting in that type of situation. And one person who I was able to work with on negotiating the contract on the outset was actually, she was working with a global brand that wanted to sign a 6-month contract. And it was 15 days into the contract, and the brand decided they wanted to bring that role in-house and basically just stack it on someone else's pre-existing salary. But because we had negotiated a 60-day notice clause, that gave her a $20,000 runway to like then be able to go and figure out what her next, you know, project was going to be, because she had marked off the next 6 months of her life to devote to this brand. And so, you know, seemingly little asks like that on the outset can make a big difference with the contracts. And then lastly, it'd be intellectual property. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but thinking about what type of intellectual property you've created or that someone else is creating for you, who is going to own that? How can you use it or change it? How can they use it or change it? If you're kind of collaborating with a colleague or a friend in business to co-create something, Can you each sell that separately? Like what are kind of the rules around that? What are we agreeing to? And I think that's one that people often skip. Unlike, payments, we pay a little bit more attention to that sometimes, but intellectual property people don't necessarily think about, unless they've started like Kimberly and have started with a patent, and then they're like, I am very technology, like I'm going to protect my stuff, I'm very serious about this. But a lot of other folks don't think about all of the different types of intellectual property that is involved in the relationship. And so thinking about that on the outset and having some hard conversations to get clarity on what you need and what the client needs can go a long way.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That is so helpful, especially the examples of what this looks like actually in practice when business owners are just running through their day-to-day. And I think the last thing you said about just getting clarity, but we often have a lot of assumptions based on our personalities, our experiences, what we expect from people, and just making sure to put those things in writing and be clear about that shared expectations, I think is so powerful and really important to protect the business, but also just make the work flow, kind of keep everything just moving how it should be. So thank you so much, Kristen. Kimberly, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about contracts and their role in your business. Can you tell us about an experience when a contract played a really crucial role and kind of how you navigated that situation?
Sure. I'll save the best for last, but to Kristen's point, there's so many different contracts that I use day to day. For example, I outsource my Amazon advertising agency, so it's really important to establish those rules prior to going into business with this agency. And the same with, let's say, website design, social media marketing. There's so many contracts that need to be enlisted just to protect yourself. And a lot of these companies want to protect themselves from my company as well. So it's very important to make sure you have all of the rules negotiated prior to engaging with that company. I also have contracts with my intern and part-time employees, and most importantly with my factory, because I want to make sure that they keep on time and that everything that's promised to me, I receive. So as far as the fun one, I'd say the fun one would be the contract with Shark Tank. So interestingly, the year I filmed, I didn't make it to air. And it was basically a secrecy contract. So I wasn't allowed to tell anyone that I was going to be on the show until 3 weeks prior to my episode airing. So after that year went through, I was unable to talk about being on the show, but I wasn't going to be on the show. But for me, COVID was actually a good thing. Because of COVID, well, not a good thing, but because of COVID, they didn't believe that they would be able to film Shark Tank. They ultimately ended up filming in a quarantined hotel in Las Vegas, but ABC bought my episode from the year prior because they didn't think that they had any material. So I still had to stick with the secrecy contract in regard to from the point that I was told that ABC bought my episode until my episode finally aired. And I still am tied to that contract because I could only use certain logos and certain footage from the show in my social media and my email marketing and my advertisements. So it's very important that I follow the rules so that Shark Tank can't come after me for being a bad participant on their show.
Well, thank you for sharing those examples. I mean, the last one in particular, it's such a fantastic opportunity. And so you certainly want to be playing by the rules to make the most of having been on such a successful show. So
Absolutely.
Cool. All righty. So we are going to move to, and we've talked about it a little bit already, but going a bit more in depth on intellectual property. So Kristen, I'll come back to you. What are some specifics that startup owners should be keeping in mind when it comes to intellectual property? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you.
Sure.
Intellectual property encompasses a few different things. I'm going to start with what I think is applicable to a lot of businesses, which is trademark. And when we think about trademark, we're talking about your brand name. It can be your logo or product names also. And that is something where you would typically be registering that at some point through the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I like mentioning it at the outset because it's something that can take a fairly long time to actually get through that process from the time that you, work with a lawyer, hopefully to do a comprehensive search so that you're not infringing on someone else's pre-existing marks, which, can lead you to have to like throw away products that you've already branded or have to rebrand your business down the road. So we want to definitely avoid that, certainly for product-based businesses, but it can take up to like 18 months, just for them to like finally like kind of look at your application. So it's something where it's like, think about it early. If that's something where like your heart is really like dead set on this branding, or where, you've got a product, you're going to be making, significant financial investments in, kind of printing things or putting, something physical out there, that might make more sense versus, you've got a service-based business that's not necessarily going to be top of mind, when you're just getting started and working with a more limited budget. One example I have of like how that went wrong was someone not choosing to pursue trademark registration from the outset was a client who was going to start the process before the pandemic. And then they were like, no, like we're going to wait a little longer. Even though they did have products, they were going to be opening a showroom also. And their brand name included the words together and home in it. So then the pandemic hits and everything is home together and together home. And, there's a big event that was involving multiple celebrities, and they lost a licensing opportunity that probably could have paid pretty well, as well as any negotiating power to be involved in that event, or just to like use the brand name that they had been using. Because when you've got other folks that then start trademarking this stuff because they just do that as a habit because that's part of their kind of professionalism and they have the budget for it, it's significantly more expensive to get that trademark revoked after the fact. And a lot of small business owners simply can't afford to do that. And then, it became a commonplace phrase. So they, probably wouldn't be able to trademark it now, to be honest. Another thing to think about when we think about intellectual property is more like creative content, which would kind of come under copyright law. So we usually think about that with like books or movies or music. That can also be other sorts of resources and materials that you put together for your business. It could be, a workbook, or I've had clients, kind of self-publish different types of books, or other digital resources too. It can be your website, whatever content you've got on your website with the photos and the copy that's on there. If you've got blog post content and other creative elements to that too, that can fall under copyright law. And unlike trademarks, which take a long time and it can be expensive to pursue registration, copyright, you get the right just by creating the thing, but you don't really get any of the rights to enforce it. So copyright registration, you can do online. If you give it your best effort, the Copyright Office is more humane and is like, okay, well, like they tried. PTO, on the other hand, with trademarks and patents is like, if the I is not dotted properly, like you're done. So, and it costs just $65 for the copyright registration. So it's something that's pretty fast, simple, easy enough, and lower budget that you can do to protect content in a different kind of way. And so as I mentioned before, like if you create the content, you do have a copyright to it. You just can't file a lawsuit and you don't get access to automatic damages. So those are the two things where when you register, you do get access to those things. And I have had clients recently be on kind of the receiving end of copyright demand letters, and even one threatened, and did actually file a lawsuit for using images they had pulled off of Google on their website and in blog posts or on social media marketing. So on the flip side of things, you want to make sure that you are respecting other people's intellectual property, including the photographers, because there are agencies out there that partner up with law firms that will just come at you and bully you if you use their images. And a lot of the resources, whether it's Google or whether it's some other paid but very small amount of money service, they don't guarantee that they have the rights to any of those photos. So when and if you have the budget to get your own branded photos, that's a really good idea to do. But just be really careful, because if you pull a photo with a celebrity in it, you are probably going to get some sort of notice about it, and probably a demand letter for at least several $100s. And then I'm not going to talk too much about patents because I know Kim's got that covered, but that is another thing for inventions. And so if you're doing a product and it's got some functionality, that is another really extensive process to go through, but can be really important to do even before you start your business. And then lastly, we've got trade secrets. So one of the best examples of a well-kept trade secret is the recipe for Coca-Cola. Or for Pepsi, like any of these companies that have these recipes that, like, you know, and these brands that are just really strongly associated with it, that is all under like lock and key with security measures and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement and enforcement policies with that. And so, again, with any intellectual property protection strategy, you've got registration as one way of protecting things. You've got the contracts, you know, which is letting people know how they can use your brand name or not in marketing, how they can use your content or not, also how you can use the stuff that they create for you and change it or not. And then you also have something that's free, easy, and fast, which is, you know, throwing a copyright and trademark notice, you know, in the footer of content. And that's letting, you know, the well-intentioned folks out there who are like, oh, but this resource was just so cool. It's like, yes, and it's mine. Please don't share it without permission, especially for paid products. If it's something that's free and you're okay with people sharing that, you can say these are protected and you're welcome to share or share it with other folks by sending them to this link. And maybe that gets them on your email newsletter. You know, there are strategies that can kind of go hand in hand with notifying people kind of what the boundaries are, while also kind of aligning that with our business strategy and what would feel good in terms of how things are shared.
So you're exactly right about the patents. I want to come to Kim to talk about your patenting process for the click and carry products that you invented. So how would you say patenting your product has benefited your business? And what advice do you have for other business owners who are considering going on that journey, that process?
So for me, it was viable and necessary, mostly for peace of mind, to know that I was always protected by having these 2 utility patents. And KRISTEN mentioned the amount of time it takes. My first utility patent took almost 3 years, and the second another 18 months. And it was even more difficult for my trademark, because my name was actually an abandoned name by someone who had taken up the name in, I believe, the 60s. So sometimes the process is a long one, but trust me that it's worth it for many reasons. And for me, it's mainly for credibility with retailers, or even getting on the show Shark Tank. They know that I am serious about my business and my invention when I have the patent protection. Plus, companies like, let's say, Kroger, who would be a perfect company for me to align with, they want to make sure that I'm the only one that isn't able to sell this product, so that they don't bring it in and have cheap knockoffs from Temu or Alibaba or things like that. So it's also, in addition to a way to show credibility to major retailers that I may want to align with one day, and I am aligned with many of these companies already, thank goodness, but also as protection, because recently, it happened in October, I have had patent infringement. So luckily, I do have this protection in the United States, but I do not have it worldwide. So luckily, I do have trademarks and I do have copyrights. So I really made it essential and important for me to make sure that I protect my product while I can, because with a utility patent, you're able to promote your product for 20 years. And then there are other ways around it. For example, let's say I made a slight modification, I can extend the life of my patent using the next generation. But for me, it was important to invest all that money into making sure my product was protected. And because I'm dealing with the situation with a factory in China, I've since hired a VA who scrapes all different platforms to see if there's an infringer out there or an imposter. I work with my intern to have those imposters taken down off the platform. And in certain cases, like for example, with Amazon, I hired a patent attorney who is helping me through a program at Amazon called the Apex program, where the first time it took me 3 weeks to get an infringer taken down. The second time it also took another 3 weeks, but now I've been registered in the Apex program. So if another infringer happens to come along on Amazon, I'm in the Apex program where I've been approved. So now it only takes 24 to 48 hours with which that item that is an infringer will be taken down. So that would deter people from wanting to come after me and my product, which is fantastic. So I find it very important to protect myself. And I've also hired a new system. It's a platform where AI is trained to find these imposters on all different platforms. For example, on Alibaba, on AliExpress, on Temu, even American companies like Amazon and Walmart.com. So I'm notified instantly if there's someone trying to infringe on the patent. So I could sick my VA and my intern on them and this company that I've hired. And I'm aware of it, and I'll hurry up and get them taken down. So like I said, it's going to be a deterrent for people to want to mess with me and to try to utilize my product to make money when they're not allowed to use my IP protected product. And I want to tell people that there's so many different free capabilities out there. For example, there is a PTRC, which is a Patent and Trademark Resource Center, where the librarians are educated in anything patent related or trademark related or copyright related. It's a free resource. So you can go to them and you could ask about designs that you need to incorporate it into your utility patent. It's a way for you to find local patent attorneys in your area. In fact, every single state in the United States has at least 2 patent and trademark resource centers. It's a phenomenal program, and these librarians are just brilliant. Also, I would advise people to work with local colleges or the SBA, the SBDC. Even law students can help you in your quest to find this information. There's so many different resources that you may utilize to help you when deciding what you want to do. If you want to have a copyright, if you want to have a trademark, if you want to have a utility patent, a design patent. So there are many ways that you can learn this information for free in the community. So I advise you to look into those alternative uses. And KRISTEN has an amazing business where everything's listed and you can download her information through her services. So I also would strongly advise you to look into what she has to offer as well.
Thank you so much, Kim. You listed so many benefits of the patent that I had never even thought about. I mean, it's very clear. I've never tried to patent something, but the legitimacy that it gives you with potential vendors or other types of business partners, and also just sort of hearing all of the resources that you are able to bring to bear on potential threats to your business. The patent's kind of the foundation of you being able to use some of those resources. That's so interesting. It's very smart that you've protected everything in the way that you have. And thanks for sharing about those other free resources that people might be able to access as well.
Absolutely. In fact, if I could interject really quickly, when I was designing Click and Carry, I knew that I had to go through multiple prototypes until I found the winner. And at the time I was working for Medtronic in deep brain stimulation. And one of my doctors at USC put me in touch with a student who was attending the Pasadena Design School. And the reason that was a real benefit is because they had access to her name is Audrey. She had access to a 3D CAD printer. And if I had utilized a 3D CAD printer out in the industry, each time I created a new iteration, it would have been a couple $1,000s. And I was able to pay the Pasadena Design School through Audrey $175 per iteration. It took me 9 iterations. So it was $2,000 total. And interestingly, because it goes back to patents, since she helped me and she had my trade secrets, I made sure to design a contract that she assigned rights to any of the knowledge that she had with the 3D CAD prints over to my business. So I paid her for her services, but I made sure that all the intellectual property was assigned to my business because it was my idea, even though I wasn't the one who actually physically did the 3D CADs.
Oh, that's so smart. Very, very smart. All right. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and we have so many good questions coming into the chat now. And so I want to turn to some of those questions and try to ask one or two about each of these key areas. So going back to our entity formation, then contracts, and then the intellectual property. We've had a number of questions about selecting and then potentially changing entity formation. So KRISTEN, I will ask this to you. If somebody, and we had, like I said, a number of different potential scenarios come in the chat, but if somebody currently has an LLC, what kinds of considerations might compel them to want to change that status? And do you have any insights on how to kind of strategically do that? Is there a best time of year? Is there a best point in the business? Anything that people can be thinking about in whether and when to change their entity?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I'm going to start with like the practical thing, which is like your CPA will be happiest with you if you line up the tax year with the business, with any sort of business conversion. But sometimes it can save you a lot of money in taxes to do something mid-year. So definitely check with your CPA around the timing and any tax implications that may have. For entity conversions, it's a state by state thing. Some states have a clear process and it's a simple form to do. And then you've got to, if you go from an LLC to a corporation, you've got to issue stock, you've got to do some corporate compliance things that are basically a bunch of long, boring legal paperwork that I'm not going to go into right now, but there's a lot of other stuff involved. In a corporation, you've got to have annual board and shareholder meetings and take minutes, that's notes, and you've got to sign them. If you don't do that, you can lose the legal risk protection that you get by having an entity. So you've got to check a bunch more boxes to stay in compliance just with basic corporate law. So that's why a lot of small business owners are juggling a bunch of different things and don't really need stock and don't really need to have a meeting with me, myself, and I every year. You're already doing that constantly. That's why a lot of them go for LLCs. The other piece that you may think about in terms of like a conversion or a shift in business would be changing the tax classification of the business entity. So again, it's a thing where when clients hit, it depends on their financial situation. It's usually between $50,000 and $100,000 in gross revenue a year, but talk to a CPA. It may make sense to change, how the structure is being taxed. And then if you're a corporation and trying to scale up and hire a bunch of folks, again, whether you're taxed as a C Corp or an S Corp, these are just letters assigned to parts of the tax code. They have no other meaning beside that. And again, a C Corp and an S Corp are not entities. It's just referring to the tax code. Same with an LLC that's taxed as an S Corp. So a lot of times we'll hear in small business world, my accountant said I need an S Corp instead of an LLC. And you can literally file a simple 2-page form with the IRS just to change the tax classification without changing the entity and issuing stock and doing all the other corporate stuff. So that's where a lot of CPAs don't know that because they're not lawyers, and it can be good to have both of those professionals on your team so you're not making decisions that impact you financially without all of the relevant information. Because once you go a certain direction, it does cost time and money to go back. And there are free resources out there. And also a lot of those are overloaded. And so if you need to have something done by a certain time, you're going to be on a wait list, or it's going to take more time. And so it's really a matter of what kind of currency. Is it the financial kind like cash, or is it our energy? And what do you have the budget and bandwidth for?
Yeah, all very important to think through. Thank you, KRISTEN. Okay, so we had a contract related question. A couple people were asking, Kim, I know you mentioned that you have contracts with your part-time employees and your interns, but actually for either of you, Kim or KRISTEN, what do you recommend in terms of any contracts for positions that are not paid. If a business is working with volunteer work, maybe friends and family kind of helping out, or unpaid internship, are contracts sort of a best practice even in that situation, even if there's not money being transferred?
I would say yes, because then you establish what is expected of the intern. Just a great way to level the playing field. And I'll give an example. When I was in college, I had a partnership with a friend, and by the end of it, we were not friends anymore, and that was very sad to me. But before we went into business together, we decided if we can't come upon a decision, we would flip a coin, and I would be heads and she would be tails. So just simple procedures like that can really help eliminate problems down the line. So I think it's smart to establish a precedent early, and then people know what is expected of them.
Yeah, just to preserve the working relationship. KRISTEN, anything to add about that?
I have so many thoughts. That could be a whole nother webinar. So, I'm licensed in California. In California, like, you got to pay people. It's really, really difficult to kind of navigate the requirements, even for internships and stuff like that. You certainly want to have the, whatever the rules are around the contract relationship in writing. But as we see more movement around independent contractor versus employee laws, not just in California, which, did have a pretty overarching, chaotic for small business owners to navigate rule that I think was in 2020 or went into effect in 2020, and then they keep kind of messing with it. That's happening at the federal level also. And so having, an ironclad contractor agreement, which is for anyone who is not an employee of your business that is going to be playing some sort of external role, is really important in making sure that you are treating them like they are a separate professional. And because it's not just what's in writing, it's what is happening in practice that they're also looking at the court level in terms of reclassifications. And it is, if one person takes 45 seconds to file a complaint online, which is possible to do in California, it can cost a minimum of $25,000 just to settle. And it's like, you didn't even do anything, but an employment lawyer will be like, just pay them and like walk away, because it's going to get more expensive if you fight it. So it's a good reason to talk to a lawyer and make sure you're being intentional about how you structure relationships.
All right, I think that's going to be the last question we have time for about trademarks. We've had a few questions come in about whether somebody should pursue a trademark or a copyright. And KRISTEN, I believe you have information probably about that on your website. And you talked about it earlier about what kinds go where, so we can have people refer back to the recording. But we did have a number of people talking about their trademark that they have filed. Should they wait until it goes through, until they get confirmation to use that mark publicly? Or can they go ahead and be using that logo or that brand name that they filed for before they receive that confirmation from USPTO?
So it's a good question. For a brand name that you're getting trademarked, you can use it beforehand. You need to use a TM symbol next to it, not the R with the circle. The R with the circle is special status. You only get that once you have the paper in hand from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. One risk of that is, you don't have the trademark issued yet. You don't really know for sure if it's going to get granted or rejected. There could be someone else out there using it. So that's also a good reason to work with a lawyer and have a comprehensive trademark search done as part of the registration process for the trademark, because then you have a better sense, because they'll pull from state databases, local databases, and the federal one. So it's not the same as just going on the Patent and Trademark Office's website and trying to do your own search. They also just changed their system and made the search function like pretty much unusable for most people. So, so working with a lawyer can help you understand, okay, well, there might be this risk, but we think we can differentiate it. So we should still be able to get the registration. And if I get a nasty letter, like I, have someone who can support me, on that from this other company that's using something, similar. But yeah, it is a little bit of a risk to launch before you do it. And also small business owners do that all the time and don't even do searches. So do the best you can with the information you have when you can, and we will learn one way or another.
Yes, we will. We will always keep learning. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. This is going to have to be the end of our conversation today. I feel like we could do this for at least another hour. There's so many important things to think through when it comes to legal considerations when starting a business, but I want to give the biggest possible thank you to Kim and to KRISTEN, to both of you for sharing your time and your wisdom and your expertise with us. Thank you to everybody who joined us today as well for investing the time to learn more about how to protect your business. I hope you feel more ready to do that. And you can check out all sorts of other business resources at AOF's website. We are here to support you. So thanks again, everybody. We will see you at the next webinar.